Have you ever had to choose between your dignity and the life of someone you love? What would you give up if it meant your child might live to see another sunrise? Under the heavy black skies of Vorex 9, there was no day and no mercy. The twin moons cast their pale light over the jagged skyline, illuminating the rusted platforms of the infamous slave market. The air reeked of old metal and desperation. Chains clinked, not as warnings but as punctuation, announcing another soul being sold like meat in a butcher's stall. She stepped onto the auction platform in silence. Tall, slender, and alien in the most elegant way, Maela had the kind of posture that defied her surroundings. Her skin shimmered a faint lavender beneath the overhead lights, marked by bruises but never bowed. Her eyes scanned the crowd, not for kindness, not anymore. She looked for the fastest buyer, the one who would make this over quickly, the one who wouldn't ask questions. She wasn't weeping, she wasn't begging. She didn't have the energy to plead for her freedom, because it wasn't hers she cared about. She only said, loud enough to be heard, "I need credits for my daughter's medicine." And that was all. The auctioneer chuckled. "Start the bid at 50. Rare hybrid, excellent teeth, compliant temperament." There was laughter. There was always laughter in places like this. Ugly, guttural laughter. Not at jokes, but at suffering. Then came a voice. Calm, clear, male. 100. The crowd turned. A human, older, worn. His jacket was stained with old grease and his boots were too clean for this place. He stood still, hands in his pockets, eyes locked on Maela's face. Not her body, not her scars. Just her. 150, another bidder shouted, amused now. 200, the man said again, not raising his voice. 3, come on, look at her, those eyes alone. 400, the man said. The auctioneer blinked. That was above market for an untrained alien female, well above. He tried to make it fun. 400 credits, going once, going twice. Silence. Sold. To the quiet human with more money than sense. The crowd murmured. Someone snickered, but no one bid further. Not out of respect, but because the man looked like the kind who didn't bluff. And people in places like Vorex knew when not to poke sleeping animals. Grant approached the platform, offering no collar, no leash. He didn't extend his hand either. He just looked at her and said, "Can you walk?" Maela nodded. She followed him down, not looking back. The walk to the ship was silent. Vorex 9 didn't allow long goodbyes. It didn't allow anything except deals. When they reached the vessel, an old freighter patched and humming quietly, he let her enter first. Inside was Spartan but clean. The cockpit smelled of metal and coffee. Not fear, not rot, not blood. She hesitated by the entrance. Her instincts were clawing at her ribs. "Why did you pay that much?" she finally asked. He started up the ship, not looking at her. "Because you said your daughter needs medicine." Maela clenched her jaw. "So what? That doesn't mean I belong to you." "No," Grant said, "you don't." Then he handed her a thermal blanket. No cuffs, no expectations. She stood there, blanket in hand, unsure whether she had stepped into a trap or a sanctuary. Because kindness like that, it didn't exist in the real world, not without cost. And somewhere inside, Maela knew the real story was just beginning. Oh, have you ever sat in silence so heavy it felt like another person in the room? Not the kind of silence that comforts, but the kind that measures you, waits to see what you'll do next. What do you say to someone who gave up everything, for someone they'll never see again? Maela sat curled on the edge of the narrow bunk, the thermal blanket wrapped around her shoulders like armor. It had been hours since the ship left Vorex 9, long enough for the ache in her knees to settle, for the scent of rust and chain to fade from her senses, but not long enough for the fear to go. The hum of the freighter was steady, almost comforting. Each vibration in the hole felt like a heartbeat she didn't trust yet. Across the small cabin, Grant sat at the helm, not looking at her, not questioning her silence, just flying. The stars slid past the front viewport like silver threads in dark fabric. Outside, the galaxy moved. Inside, everything held still. "There's tea in the galley," he said without turning. Myla flinched slightly, not because of his tone, there was no edge to it, but because her body had forgotten how to expect anything but commands. She stood slowly. Her steps were cautious, barefoot, the blanket still draped over her. In the small kitchen nook, she found the kettle exactly where he said, hot, simple. A plain ceramic mug beside it, mismatched with the rest of the utilitarian metalware. She poured. She drank. She didn't thank him. She didn't know how. Grant didn't fill the space with small talk. He just flew, adjusting a dial now and then, murmuring a curse at a flickering sensor. A man used to the quiet, used to carrying the weight alone. Finally, she spoke. "I'm not what you think I am." He didn't answer immediately, didn't say, "I know," or "I don't care." He just looked over his shoulder and met her eyes. "I didn't buy you to be anything." She narrowed her gaze. "Then why?" He shrugged. "Maybe because someone didn't do the same for me." That quiet hung again. A little softer this time. She sat at the edge of the co-pilot seat, tea warming her fingers. "I lied about the medicine," she said. His brow furrowed slightly, but he didn't interrupt. "She died 3 nights before the auction. Fever. No one helped. Not the guards, not the buyers, not even the others chained near us. I sold myself because I didn't know what else to do. I thought maybe if I became something useful, something someone would pay for, I could feel like she didn't die for nothing." Grant's jaw tightened. Myla looked away. "So, congratulations. You bought a liar, a broken one." "I've bought worse?" he said, his voice calm. She blinked. "That was supposed to scare you off." He gave a soft, dry laugh. "Myla, I've fought pirates in gas storms, been shot by raiders, and once I had to eat freeze-dried fungus for 2 weeks straight. You think a broken heart scares me?" The silence this time was warmer, no longer watching them, just resting between them. Grant stood and stretched. "Cabin's yours, I'll bunk in the cargo hold." Myla frowned. "You're giving me your bed." "You're not a prisoner," he said. She looked down at the mug. "Then what am I?" He didn't answer. He just walked past her, pausing only to hand her a datapad. It displayed a star map, clean coordinates, clear path. "That's where I'm headed. You've got until morning to decide if you want to stay on board or pick another destination. I can drop you anywhere safe." She didn't sleep that night. Not really. She lay curled in the cot, staring at the ceiling, the blanket now clutched to her chest. Not for warmth, but for something closer to protection. Outside, the hum of the engine sang her a lullaby she didn't trust, but didn't hate. In the quiet, she dreamed of her daughter's face. Not the sick version, the one from long ago, laughing, running through purple grass, chasing the wind. And in the morning, when Grant found her standing in the cockpit with the datapad still in hand, she only said 2 words. "I'll stay." What makes a place feel safe? Is it the walls, the locks, or the person who looks at you and chooses not to hurt you when they could? Myla stood at the edge of the cockpit, still holding the datapad. Her grip was firm, not from fear now, but from something more unsettling, uncertainty. Grant was pouring coffee into a dented old tin mug, his back turned, acting like her decision to stay didn't mean the stars themselves had shifted course. "I don't have many rules," he said, setting the mug down on the small ledge beside the navigation controls. "But the ones I do have, I keep." She nodded slowly. "Let me guess. No stealing, no screaming, no sabotaging the engines." "No lying," he said simply. That stopped her. "I already told you. I know. And you told the truth after. That counts." She swallowed. "The rest?" she asked. "No sneaking up on me. If you touch a weapon, you tell me. You don't have to ask. Just let me know you're carrying. I don't like surprises." And he paused, turning to face her now. "No selling yourself. To me or anyone else. Not for credits, not for favors, not even if you think it'll make things easier." Mayella blinked. "I wasn't planning to," she said flatly. "Good, then we're clear." He took a sip of coffee. The steam curled around his beard like smoke from an old campfire. It smelled bitter and grounding. She leaned back against the co-pilot seat. "I've had masters who made longer lists," she said. "I'm not your master," Grant replied, not looking at her now. "And this isn't a slave ship, it's a ship. You're on it." She looked around the cockpit again, trying to decide if that distinction mattered. Then she realized it did. A little. He reached for the control panel, adjusted their heading by a few degrees, then glanced back at her. "You said your name's Mayla. What did you do before?" "Before the collar?" she asked, voice sharp. He raised an eyebrow. "I was going to say before Vorex 9. She hesitated. "I was a translator. I worked trade delegations between border systems. My species has a knack for languages. It paid well, until the war, until the contracts dried up, until the raids started and women like me were suddenly worth more in chains than in conference rooms." Grant nodded slowly. "That makes you more useful than 90% of the people I've flown with." Mayella narrowed her gaze. "Don't patronize me." "I'm not." They stared at each other a beat longer than necessary. Then Grant shrugged and turned back to the controls. "You want a job?" he asked. Her eyes widened. "You're offering me work?" "I need someone to monitor comms, read signals, translate weird dialects. I've been flying alone too long, and besides, this isn't charity. I'll feed you, give you a bunk, pay you in fuel credits if you want to leave later. But I don't do freeloaders." Mayella's fingers curled around the datapad again. "And if I say no?" He looked over his shoulder again. "Then you're just a passenger, until the next station." She thought for a long moment, then nodded once. "Fine, I'll earn my way." The words tasted strange in her mouth. Not bitter, just unfamiliar. Like a forgotten language rising back from the grave. Grant gave a single nod and turned back to his screen. "Comms console's over there," he said. "Start learning the interface." She moved to it slowly, scanning the glowing buttons and blinking symbols. They weren't that different from what she'd known years ago, before the war, before everything else. There was silence again, but this time it was different. It wasn't measuring her, it was waiting to see what she would build. A home? Maybe not yet, but something. And as the freighter sailed on through dark space, two strangers sat side by side. Not master and servant, not buyer and product, but something inching closer to what neither of them had allowed themselves to hope for. A second chance. What happens when the one place you think is safe becomes just another battlefield? What do you do when peace feels fragile enough to shatter under your next breath? 3 days passed. Long enough for Mayella to fall into the rhythm of the ship. It wasn't comfort, not quite, but it was something close to habit. She woke at the same hour Grant did, helped with diagnostics, made herself useful on the comms. She didn't ask questions about his past, and he didn't press her about hers. It was a quiet agreement, sealed not with words, but with mutual fatigue. The ship, an aging cargo-class hauler named the Marlin Gray, creaked in certain turns and stuttered when the docking clamp retracted. Grant cursed at it like it was an old friend, and Mayala began to understand which curses were serious and which were just part of his morning routine. But then came Sector 8. It started as a blip on the nav scanner, a cluster of electromagnetic pulses, too consistent to be natural and too irregular to be registered traffic. Mayela was the first to spot it, her fingers flying over the console as she magnified the readings. "This isn't just interference," she said, eyes narrowing. "This is jamming, military grade." Grant leaned over her shoulder, frowning. "No colonies out here, no outposts, just rock and scrap fields. Who the hell would be—" The freighter jolted. Not violently, just enough to make the coffee slosh over Grant's console and to make every old screw in the ship sing out in protest. Mayela gripped the panel edge. "Tell me that was turbulence." Grant didn't answer. He flicked a switch, switching the view to external cam. What appeared wasn't a storm of weather, but of steel. Dozens of tiny objects filled the void ahead. Not ships, mines, swarming like gnats, their energy signatures barely detectable until they were too close. Whoever planted them didn't want to stop traffic. They wanted to trap someone. And now it was them. "Fringe pirates," Grant muttered. "Cowards with stolen tech and nothing to lose." Mayela felt the fear crawl up her spine. Not the terror she'd known in chains. This was colder, more calculating. "What do? We don't stop," he said flatly. "They expect panic, expect you to freeze, turn back, or plead. I've danced this song before." He flipped the comm switch. To her surprise, he gestured for her to speak. "Translate this," he said, "into whatever trade dialect they'll understand." She blinked, then nodded. After a moment of furious tapping, she hit transmit. "To the vessels cloaked beyond the minefield. This ship is unarmed and carries no high-value cargo. We're a maintenance hauler en route to Nova Station 7. Divert now, and you'll be ignored. Engage, and you'll face orbital tracebacks and alliance consequences." They waited. Nothing. Then crackling. "Gray Bird," came the voice, distorted and deep. "You carry more value than you think. Your passenger glows on our radar. Biotech signature, enhanced cortex. That's no scavenger. That's lab-grown currency." Mayela went pale. Grant's eyes narrowed. "They're tracking you," he said. She nodded slowly. I didn't know. My species were born with certain neural layers. My daughter had them too. It's why we made good translators. But during the war, the syndicates started hunting us, harvesting us. You thought you were beneath their radar." Grant finished for her. "You're not." He turned back to the controls. "Hold on." What followed was madness in slow motion. He pushed the freighter into a low spin, diving toward the densest field of mines. Alarms blared. Metal shrieked. But Grant's hands were steady, his eyes locked on the nav screen. Every time Mayela thought they were about to die, he twisted the yoke at just the right angle. Sparks danced off the shields. One mine clipped the port wing, sending the entire ship rolling, but Grant righted it without a word. They burst through the last wave. Silence. Then the scanners went dead. "They're jamming again," she said. "No," he replied. "They're cloaking something. Look." He pointed. Emerging from the black like a sea serpent, a long, sleek cruiser appeared, black as oil and just as deadly. No logos, no transponders. Syndicate make. Mayela froze. "They want me. They can't have you." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't seen before. Not pity, conviction. Without another word, He flipped the emergency beacon. "No," she said. "You can't." He turned to her. "I just did." The beacon launched into deep space. Not toward the pirates, but toward a known relay point. A distress call, Alliance patrolled. "They'll come," she whispered. "Yeah," Grant said, turning the ship, "but we won't be here when they do." Mayella glanced back at the screen. The cruiser was gaining. "Then where are we going?" He smirked. "Somewhere I can show you why I don't need guns to win." And as the ship veered toward the asteroid belt ahead, Mayella felt something strange twist in her chest. Hope. How many secrets can a man hide before even he forgets which ones matter most? The asteroid belt they dove into was not the barren wilderness Mayella expected. Through the viewport, jagged rocks floated lazily across space, like sleeping titans suspended in time. But then Grant made a hard turn, scraping the hull against a thin sheet of frozen iron, and suddenly the entire asteroid before them opened like a mechanical iris. A hidden hangar, built into the side of an ancient mining rock. Cloaked from most sensors, invisible to any passing eye unless you already knew where to look. Mayella stared as the Marlin Gray slipped inside. The blast doors sealed behind them, and the vast hollow chamber lit up with a warm amber glow. The space was cavernous. Old machinery lay in piles. Stripped hulls of drones hung like skeletons from overhead cranes, and in the far corner, a workstation flickered to life with the soft hum of dormant power reawakening. "This place is yours?" she asked. Breath caught somewhere between awe and suspicion. "Was my father's," Grant said, powering down the ship. "He used it back in the war, ran ghost ops, smuggling, rescue missions. I swore I'd never use it again." "Why now?" He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Because the war found me anyway." They descended into the hangar on foot. Mayella's boots echoed softly against the metal. The air was stale but breathable. She could almost hear ghosts whispering through the rafters. "Why didn't you stay here?" she asked. "Hide, live alone." Grant gave a low chuckle. "I tried, but quiet doesn't feel right when you still hear screaming in your dreams. So I went back out, thought maybe I'd outrun the memories." "And did you?" "Not even close." They reached the corner bay. A smaller ship was parked there, sleek, dark, built for speed and stealth. Nothing like the lumbering freighter they arrived in. Grant wiped dust from the hull with his sleeve. "This one still runs," he said. "I kept it up, for emergencies." "Like now." He nodded. Mayella walked slowly around it. "Why didn't you sell it? Trade it? You could have bought a new life." "I don't want a new life," he said quietly. "Just one I can live with." Mayella turned to him. "You risked everything back there, the pirates, the cruiser, for me." "No," Grant said, "for us." The word hung heavy in the air. United States. It meant something now, not possession, not protection, just connection. Before either of them could speak again, the hangar's console lit up. A red dot pulsed on the screen. "They tracked us," Mayella said. "No," Grant replied. "They're still jamming. That's not them. That's a relay ping. The beacon I launched, it worked." She leaned closer. "How far?" "2 systems out," he said. "Alliance fast response, ETA 10 hours. Can we wait?" He shook his head. "Number of the syndicate's got deep roots. They'll sniff this place out. We've got to move." "To where?" "To someone I trust." Mayella frowned. "You trust someone?" He gave a wry smile. "Not many, but enough." As they prepared the second ship, Mayella noticed something strange, a wall of pictures, tucked behind a stack of crates. Old photos, grainy and sun-faded, people in uniform, some smiling, some not. And in the center, one photo that caught her breath. It was Grant, much younger, cleaner, standing next to a woman with olive skin and dark eyes holding a baby in her arms. "Your family?" she asked. He didn't look, just nodded. "They're gone?" "Yeah," he said. "Years ago. Alliance mission gone sideways. I got pulled. They didn't make it out." "I'm sorry." He nodded again, said nothing for a long time. Then, finally, "I told myself I'd never care again, safer that way." "But you do?" "Yeah," he said, "and it scares the hell out of me." They boarded the stealth ship together. As it hummed to life, Grant turned to her. "There's something else," he said. "Back in the cruiser's transmission, they mentioned your daughter." Mayella stiffened. "Yes. Is she—" "I don't know," Mayella whispered. "They took her, years ago. I was told she died in transit, but—" "But?" Mayella's voice trembled. "But I never felt it. I never stopped hearing her in dreams. I think she's still out there." Grant's eyes hardened. "Then we find her." Mayella turned to him, for the first time, truly seeing him. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Why me? Why now?" Grant looked away, then back. "Because maybe saving one person makes the rest of it mean something." And with that, the ship lifted from the hangar floor, into the dark, toward a future neither of them could yet see. Have you ever felt like the universe was holding its breath, waiting for you to step into a place it never meant for you to find? They exited hyperspace in the shadow of a dead moon. The coordinates Grant had spoken aloud only once now materialized into reality. A sliver of metal half hidden in the gravitational drag of the rock, pulsing with a dull blue glow. Mayella squinted at it. "That's not on any chart." "It's not supposed to be," Grant said. "It was decommissioned years ago. Technically, it never existed." The ship coasted forward on silent thrusters. As they approached, Mayella saw what looked like a ring of collapsed docking bays, burnt-out satellites, and a tower that leaned like a broken tooth against space. Yet despite its decay, the station was alive. Lights flickered in certain corridors. Life support still thrummed under layers of forgotten code. The AI core was likely centuries old, but Grant knew how to speak its language. "This place used to be called Horizon Node 12, he explained. "Refueling outpost, then the war happened. The Syndicate took it, turned it into a black site." Mayella's hand tightened around the railing. "And now?" "Now it's mine." He guided the ship to a barely functioning docking clamp. The magnetic lock clamped down with a groan. The airlock hissed open, stale but breathable. Inside, the station smelled of rust and cold vacuum. Echoes lingered in the walls, not just of voices but of memories. Operations run in the shadows, prisoners transferred without record, lives vanished like vapor. They moved through the corridors carefully. Grant's eyes flicked left and right, hand hovering near the old pulse blade at his belt. "No sentries?" Mayella asked. "Not the kind that walk," he replied. "This place was designed to watch itself." In a chamber lined with screens and old command chairs, the central terminal flickered on. A low female voice spoke from the walls, slow and metallic. "Operator identified. Welcome back, Commander Ellis Grant." Mayella raised an eyebrow. "It still knows you." "I never logged out." He tapped a sequence of codes. The station's data core began pulsing in time with the lights. Old logs reawakened. Security feeds from long-dead cameras filled the screens in grainy grayscale. One of them showed a corridor Mayella recognized instantly. "That's Syndicate design," she said, pointing. "Those cells." Grant nodded grimly. This place wasn't just for fuel. They brought people here to vanish. As they worked through the files, Mayella pulled up a record tagged only with a number. When the hologram loaded, her breath caught. A young girl, thin, sharp eyes, tethered to a wall by a biometric restraint. Her skin glowed faintly under the sensors. Mayela's knees gave way. She clutched the edge of the console. Her name was Kaya, she whispered. My daughter. Grant was silent for a long time. Then, she's alive. Mayela looked at him, eyes wide. This isn't dated. This could be old. It's not, he said, pointing to the data stamp. 3 months ago, they were still using this relay. They spent hours combing logs, piecing together travel manifests, cell transfers, personnel schedules. Each fragment built a map, a network of syndicate movements, linking Horizon Node 12 to outposts further out. One of them stood out. A red-flagged station marked only as Aegis 9. Grant's voice hardened. That's where they took her. Mayela stood tall again. Then that's where we go. He nodded, but his eyes lingered on one last file. A message. Voice only. Played once, never deleted. Ellis, it said. A woman's voice. Familiar. Software. If you're hearing this, I'm sorry. I couldn't save them. But I saved one. She's in stasis. I marked her with a false tag. They think she's unviable. You'll know her when you see her. Please, forgive me. Mayela stepped back. Who was that? Grant swallowed hard. My sister. He looked away, blinking fast. She died trying to stop them. The silence between them grew thick. Not awkward, just heavy with the weight of choices made long ago. Regrets etched into time. Mayela put a hand on his shoulder. We don't get many second chances. He met her gaze. Then let's not waste this one. They rearmed, recalibrated. The station gave them a flight path. And as they prepared to leave, Mayela stood at the airlock once more, looking out into the void. I always thought the worst pain was losing her, she said. But the real pain was believing no one cared. Grant stood beside her. You're not alone anymore. And as the ship lifted again, leaving the station behind like a ghost shutting its eyes, a new course was set. Not just for revenge, but for reunion, for redemption, for hope. What would you do if the only person you trusted turned out to be the last one you should? The stars above Aegis 9 did not twinkle. They watched. As Grant's vessel dropped from FTL, the hidden station slowly came into view. A jagged crescent embedded in an asteroid field, disguised among the debris of a long-forgotten mining colony. Its armor was old but brutal, bristling with concealed turrets and signal-jamming nodes. This place was not on any public map. It was designed to erase things from history. Welcome to the edge of hell, Grant muttered as he cut engine noise to a crawl. Mayela stood beside him, her eyes trained on the massive docking bay ahead. She felt no fear, only the cold burn of purpose. Inside, the station's docking clamp took hold without question. They'd acquired stolen syndicate tags, coded to old credentials Grant still remembered. No alarms, no intercept, too easy. As they stepped onto the station floor, the lights adjusted to their presence. Cool blue glow. Air recycled, clean, too clean. The corridors smelled faintly of antiseptic and iron. They passed no guards, just closed doors and shadowed corners. This place is dead, Mayela whispered. No, Grant replied, it's watching. They reached the central elevator. It descended deeper than expected, down past research levels, below storage, toward containment. There they met him. Joran Lask, syndicate officer, former ally, once Grant's squadmate in the planetary wars. His voice hadn't changed, calm, melodic, reasonable. But his eyes were colder. His coat bore the insignia of the Division of Exceptional Assets. He stood in front of a reinforced stasis chamber. Inside, suspended in glowing fluid, a small form floated peacefully. A girl, pale blue skin, long hair drifting like silk in water. Kaya. Mayela rushed forward, only to be held back by a containment field. Now, Joran said smoothly. Let's be civil. Grant's jaw clenched. You said she was safe. She is, Joran replied, thanks to me. He tapped the control panel. The fluid around Kaya shimmered. She's not just your daughter, Myla, he continued. She's a key. A hybrid we never meant to succeed, but she did. She lives, which means the experiment is viable. And that's dangerous. Myla's fists shook. She's a child. She's leverage. Grant stepped forward. You sold your soul, Joran. No, Joran said with a small smile. I leased it, for peace. He gestured to the walls. Holograms lit up, showing syndicate projects, genetic manipulations, mind-linking trials, breeding programs. All of it, Joran said, was meant to prevent war, to create soldiers who wouldn't need to fight. Minds that could end battles before they began. She is proof. But at what cost? Myla asked. Joran didn't answer. Instead, he looked at Grant. You came here with noble intentions, but you're standing in the way of something bigger now. Walk away, both of you. And she lives in a gilded cage, untouched. No, Grant said. No, Myla echoed. The lights dimmed. Alarms flared. Security protocols activated. Joran sighed. Then I suppose this is the part where it gets messy. The room exploded into motion. Drones poured from the ceiling. Grant moved with practiced violence, pulse blades slicing through circuits. Myela ducked, rolled, fired twin plasma bursts into a turret node. Sparks flew, glass shattered. A console blew out. Joran retreated behind a shield. His voice came through the speakers now. You're fools. Sentiment always was your weakness. Myela reached the stasis chamber. With Grant covering her, she worked the override. The field resisted. Layers of encryption danced like serpents. But she remembered the cadence, the syllables her daughter used in sleep. A name encoded in love. The field dropped. Kaya's pod opened. She fell into Myla's arms, barely conscious but alive. Grant laid suppressing fire. They ran. Back up the corridor into lift shafts, through failing doors. The station resisted their escape. Lights flickered. Oxygen thinned. But they moved like shadows with purpose. As they reached the ship, Kaya stirred. Mom, she murmured. Myela held her tight. I've got you. I've got you. The ship launched, diving into the asteroid field. Turrets fired behind them. Joran's voice crackled one last time over comms. This doesn't end here, Grant. You've just declared war. The signal died. As they cleared the field, stars returned. Quiet, cold. But in the cockpit, warmth bloomed. Kaya's eyes opened fully. She looked up at her mother, at Grant, and whispered, Home? Myela nodded through tears. Yes, home. They didn't speak for a long time. But something had changed. The war wasn't over, but the running was. They had each other now, and that meant everything. Have you ever felt like home wasn't a place, but a person? The stars were calm that night. The kind of calm that felt earned, not given. After weeks on the run, after circuits fried and near misses, and the ghosts of 100 regrets chasing their heels, the small crew aboard the salvaged ship named Serenity finally drifted through a stretch of space so quiet it felt like a whisper. Grant stood at the viewport, arms crossed, watching the gas giant known as Elyon 5 fill the screen. Beyond it, a moon, unmapped, unnamed, but green, lush, hidden by the planet's electromagnetic storms. It was perfect. And it was theirs now. Behind him, Myela sat by Kaya, who had finally fallen into a real sleep. not the drugged synthetic slumber of stasis. Her breathing was soft, even. Maella's fingers curled protectively around a strand of the girl's hair. Grant didn't turn when he spoke. "You sure about this one?" Maella's voice came after a breath. "She needs a place to grow." Grant nodded slowly. "Then we'll build it." The moon wasn't large, but it was enough. They descended in low orbit, scanning for life, for danger, for signals that might betray their presence. There were none, just the sound of wind through alien forests, water rippling in rivers carved by time. They landed in a glade, surrounded by bioluminescent trees that pulsed softly with a rhythm like breath. Kaya opened her eyes as the ramp descended. She stared, not at data, not at prison walls or sterile lights, but at sky. Real sky. She stepped down cautiously, Maella at her side, and lifted her hand toward the sun peeking through pink-leafed trees. The light hit her skin and shimmered briefly, not in warning, in welcome. "What is this place?" Kaya asked. Maella smiled, her voice quiet. "A beginning." Grant unloaded supplies, modular shelter units, food synths, shield beacons, the basics. They worked for hours, not speaking much but moving with shared purpose. That night, under alien stars, they lit a fire. Not for heat, but for tradition. Around the crackling flames, Maella told Kaya stories, not of war or syndicates or betrayal, but of oceans and rain, of snowflakes and laughter. Things Kaya had never known. Grant listened more than he spoke. Occasionally, he'd add a detail, an old memory of Earth, of dogs barking, of grilled cheese and thunderstorms and old guitars that never stayed in tune. Kaya asked questions, so many questions. Why do trees sway like that? What's rain taste like? Can we name the moon? She decided on the name Leora. It meant light in the half-remembered language of her mother's ancestors. Maella agreed, tears in her eyes. They slept that night under a shield dome just in case, but nothing came. No signals, no drones, no war, just silence. Peace, however fragile, had found them. Weeks passed. The shelter expanded. Crops were planted. Kaya began to laugh more, to run, to paint strange flowers in the dirt with her fingers. Her power, whatever it truly was, had dulled to a faint hum in the air. Still there, but quiet, like it knew she was safe. Grant built a swing from scrap and vine. Maella carved a flute from local wood. They were not the people they once were. Soldiers, survivors, pawns. Here, they became something else. One morning, Kaya stood on a cliff and asked, "Are we staying here forever?" Grant and Maella looked at each other, and for once, there was no hesitation. "Yes," Grant said, "if we can," Maella added. Kaya accepted that. Not with fear, but with the calm of someone who'd seen the worst and found light anyway. But peace was never silent forever. A ship broke orbit 2 days later, not syndicate, not flagged, just unknown. They stayed hidden, monitored, no signals, no weapons powered, just a slow pass, and then it left. Grant looked at Maella. "Think they saw us?" Maella nodded. "Maybe." They didn't run. They watched the sky for days. But the ship did not return. Life went on, and with time, the fear dulled. Hope, once foreign, rooted deep. Kaya grew strong. Grant and Maella laughed again. And in the glow of their small fire each night, they found something many spend lifetimes chasing: belonging. Home wasn't just dirt and sky, it was trust. It was choosing love over fear. It was 3 broken souls who refused to stay broken. And for the first time, under stars older than memory, they didn't need to look over their shoulders. Because together, they had become the kind of story worth telling. So, if you're out there watching the stars, wondering if hope still matters, It does. And sometimes it looks like this. If you've stayed with us to the end, we'd love to hear what part of this story spoke to you. Was it the courage, the bond, or maybe, just maybe, the simple idea that love can be enough? Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every one,